Hi, everybody. I'm Roger Sherman, and I'm very happy to be here tonight to join you in listening to four short talks by four of our own AUD faculty, Wonne Ickx, Andrew Kovacs, Jimenez Lai, and Mohamed Sharif. In being given the task of figuring out what, if any, points of tangency exist between them, each comes from an entirely different geographic background, I thought I'd try an old parlor game and ask them each for a little-known autobiographical fact. Unfortunately, that failed to yield the hidden strand that I was hoping for. However, I will happily be sharing each of those with you as a short interlude between talks, rather than reintroduce each speaker to you, as most of you already know them well. Continuing in my quest to find similarities in their work, I only found differences. So instead, I began to ask myself if the former might unexpectedly be found in the latter, specifically their disparate backgrounds. And at least initial circumstantial evidence indicates that there is some credence to this hypothesis. Namely, Wonne, Andrew, Jimenez, and Mohamed have all landed here from foreign origins. Belgium, Chicago, yes, Chicago could be considered foreign to those of us who come from there. Taiwan, London, and London, respectively. Turns out they're a foreign legion of sorts. Though Wonne is Belgian by birth and upbringing, he made what I can imagine was quite a brave personal and professional decision to move his family and practice not once but twice, first to Mexico City and then again here to LA. Distinct cultures with their own languages and presumably modes of practice. In Andrew's case, it may be a more pathological sense of origin, through his unique sense of kinship with the hinterlands known as the Stans, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, etc. This despite the Hungarian origins of his own name. Jimenez, who may be of the four the most public in his exploration of foreignness, has lived and practiced in at least 4 places by my count. After Taiwan, then Toronto, after Toronto, Chicago, and from Chicago to here. But as most of you know, he seems to most of the time be in many places at once. A man on the move, rootless and yet with roots everywhere. And Mohamed, born in London to Egyptian parents and college educated in Scotland, spent a formative period as an exchange student studying Mies at IIT in Chicago. Given these facts, and driven by the pretext of pattern recognition that prevails upon a moderator to find linkage or causality between means, motives, and opportunities, regardless of who the lineup of usual suspects happen to be. I would like to hereby introduce for all of your consideration, or all of our consideration, the hypothesis that we are likely to find between the 4 figures an underlying sense of or interest in issues of identity, misplaced or displaced, or even assumed identity, a theme that I am hoping we might, in the conversation and questions afterward, forensically tease from the author's presentations. With that as a preemptive provocation, let's get to it. So we're going to do this in alphabetical order. Wonne first, then Andrew, Jimenez, and Mohamed. As Wonne, why don't you come on up, and while he's getting set, I'll simply tell you that Wonne had the most difficulty of all, actually coming up with a little-known fact that wasn't related to his life and identity as an architect, but when pressed, he admitted that he was fed by his mother with 2 spoons when very young, due to his impatience to be satisfied. So I'll leave it at that, and then you can fulfill that prophecy.
That's a very painful introduction. Do you hear me? Yes? It works? Normally people just sum up the academic degrees you receive. Thank you very much, Roger, for the introduction. Actually, between the 4 people speaking today, we kind of agree to try to do the same thing, to find maybe sort of common theme, and we kind of decided to work with this very generic theme of rooms, and we thought we could all find projects, narratives related to that. And I think it's important to kind of try to push that, to find a sort of common ground, to kind of find a sort of common vocabulary, in the sense that I think architecture is all about communication, through plans, drawings, through talking, and I think it's important that amongst colleagues we still keep on pushing for this vocabulary that we all can understand, for drawings that each and every one of us can read, and for words that each and every one of us can understand. As I think some of us, I'll present briefly 3 projects that all in one way or another have to do something with the idea of a room. And the idea of a room has to do with the idea of a dimension, of a size. In this case, oh, that's a pity. I needed a PowerPoint with my help on it, where I see my own notes on it. This is a building in New York from 1908, so I'll have to guess some of the references a little bit. It's called the Ashford Building, or Ashford Building. And I really like that as sort of introduction, because here architecture is really a sort of interface, a sort of mediator between an urban scale. The whole building is actually just one city block of New York, and the living room or the bedroom. It's really a sort of architecture that immediately mediates between like the most public and private of atmospheres and the city. So it's a very powerful geometric solution in its first layout, and kind of then really mediates between these 2 completely different scales. Size. Is there a way that I can have my annotations on it? Because I will do this too. Does anybody know how to do that? Normally, oh, they're not even on here actually. Huh? Ah, because you made a PDF out of it. Ah, yeah, okay. No, I understand. Sorry, guys. Otherwise, I don't have to reinvent everything. So, the idea of size and the idea of extension, the idea of here it is. It's an Aptor building in a. Huh? So this idea of architecture, about sizes, about bay widths, about dimensions, these very basic building stones of architecture, that's something that's been here for many years, and I think that will still be there for many years coming. A good friend of mine who's working now at the technology or the research department at Foster, he maybe people from this campus know that he also explained me, like, for example, how in spaceships, all the spaces, they have to be really small, basically because if they make spaces as big as this one, for example, if you by accident come to hang in the middle, in the zero gravity, there's no way you can push yourself back towards the side or something. So you always have to you would stay there until somebody comes and rescue you, basically. I will talk to you quickly about 3 projects. I've been talking a bit about my work with my students. I've lectured here a few years ago, so I will now only talk briefly 3 projects that I'm working on right now. There's a house for Jessica in Los Angeles that I hope to get a building permit for this Thursday or before the end of the year. And it has everything to do with the idea of measurement. I come up with a very obvious example, the Solowit sculptures, the modular sculpture by Solowit, who are mostly photographed in this way. This is a 1965 sculpture. But some of his work, what I'm really interested in, is, for example, this floor wall grid, which is part of the Art Institute collection in Chicago. They really relate directly to an existing architecture. And what the sculpture does on itself is like it kind of modulates, and kind of puts the existing architecture in scale. A similar thing we're trying to do with Jessica's house. She has a small cottage. This is a picture from around 1920. Small cottage in Echo Park. I really feel that there's a sort of historical, although it's a very basic house, I feel that there's a sort of historical presence there that I really appreciate. And when they actually asked us to do an addition, we basically said, let's try to. This is the model. You see that on the front facade, nothing really changes. In the back facade, basically what we do, we add a sort of a shell of a sort of very basic, simple structure to the house. Since the project I will show there in development, I won't have any professional photography or images of this project. So basically what we try to do here, we try to add this modular structure. It's 6 9 by 9 by 9 cubic elements, steel moment frame to this house. Basically, because the only thing that's wrong with these small houses is they do not really relate to the landscape. There's not a sort of they're like enclosed boxes with apertures, and there's no open relation to the landscape. What, for example, modern architecture did manage to establish. So we kind of at the two levels. You see here these additions. The upper one is always an interior space, and the two outer ones are just terraces. This is a sort of a collage, a sort of image of the backside. So this is sort of a piece of furniture that stands into the garden, that stands next to the house, and it kind of tries to create a new relation between the existing house and the garden around it. It's the same. That's the upper level. This thing, this module is placed at a certain distance from the house, creating this 3 feet gap between the existing house and the structure, and creating this moment of tensions where all of a sudden, like sort of this regularity, this modularity, kind of meets the more historical and organical nature of the existing house. The second project I want to talk about is a Teo house, a house we're doing in a 2-hour drive from Mexico City. Since I studied in one of the few schools in Europe, or one of the that basically offered a curriculum to their students based on John Hajduk educational doctrine based on a 9-square grid. More and more, I start to understand how that has really left an impact on the way that I think, and it's generated a sort of generation of architecture that is very, very used, I think, to work with limiting and fixing specific parameters, and only work with others. This is house number 7 of the series 7 houses, and this is the house we're doing basically in Cuernavaca. It's a very small site, and we basically in plan generated 4 similar squares, each 5.2 meters by 5.2 or 17 feet. And in these spaces we start to organize the different bedroom, living room, etc. For us, it was an interesting part about this house. It's a very low budget house, as many of our projects in Mexico City, and it's all built with a 12 centimeter, like half or a third of a feet almost a third of a feet. Yeah. Brick walls, which is actually the cheapest material you can find in Mexico City. They use it also for social housing. But it's a material that we think if we could reinvent it a little bit, if we could reuse it in a different way, it could be powerful. It is this structure of bearing walls of brick. You see like a section with some spaces have double height, some are lower, some are higher. And it has a sort of, and it has this roof structure which is called Vigueta and Bovedilla, sort of prefab concrete beams with an infill structure of lightweight concrete. What we thought was interesting, normally these houses, they get plastered on the inside and the brick stays on the outside in their cheapest version, and we just tried to do it the other way around. We decided to plaster the house on the outside and have this brick as a sort of visual texture on the whole inside of these spaces. Also for the roof structure, we thought that these 5.2 meter squares, the prefab concrete beams, they exist up to 7 meters. So we just buy the full length of these prefab concrete strips, and we would let them, as you can see here in this drawing, we would let them go outside of the house in order to create the start of a terrace, a covered terrace. Here you can see it. And of course, these first images on the building sites are for me very exciting, because that's the moment where really, actually the only decision, the only real initial decision taken at the moment when we start working on this project is the decision of the width, the bay width, the dimension of these rooms. These 17 feet or these 5.2 meters, they become really the DNA of the house. And when you first see them realize, and you see them actually from the very beginning, from the moment they start working on the foundation, the whole DNA of a house is already present in the construction. For me, it's a bit like looking at archaeological sites. If you go and look to ancient, to archaeological construction, and also all the later. Everything is eroded. The only thing that stays is the foundations. But in this foundation, you can already read all the key aspects of a building, from the way the spaces were related to each other, the way they related to the landscape, the widths and the dimensions. A third project I will briefly talk about, and I round up with a sort of conclusion, is the Camera of Wonders, an exhibition we opened a few weeks ago in Mexico City, curated by Jens Hoffman. He's the curator of the Jewish Museum in New York, and he worked on a photo exhibition based on 2 photo collections. It's an exhibition that will travel from Mexico City to Medellin and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and probably Buenos Aires in Argentina as well. In his first talks, he said he was very, very interested in this exhibition the MoMA organized in the 1950s called Family of Men. It's a very interesting exhibition. Basically, they took pictures not only from very famous photographers, but also they did an open call for photographers all around the world to send in proposals. And it was Paul Rudolph who did the exhibition design. The curator was very interested to create a sort of more spatial design in which, like, images would at a certain moment overlap. You would see through certain images to discover different parts of the exhibition in the background, etc. Since the exhibition had to travel, we had to kind of think of self-standing exhibition elements. Self-standing exhibition elements that would be pretty lightweight because they had to travel. At the same time, they should also be solid enough to, I mean, some of these pictures by Andreas Gursky, they weigh more than 100 pounds, etc. So at a certain moment we were looking at this, at the early work of Richard Serra, for example, this piece called House of Cards, or 1 ton prop, in which basically he has these surfaces, these exhibition surfaces, we imagined them as exhibition surfaces, that kind of lean against each other and thereby form like solid self-structured elements. We started to make models to kind of see how this could work, how like this very simple wooden paneling could all of a sudden, pieces could kind of, four different walls could kind of lean against each other and then create these kind of interior spaces, this heart of this how do you call it? Sort of, it's like a windmill, like a windmill kind of organization. which we then can play. We could have like larger or shorter arms. We could like have bigger interior, etc. This is an image of the Sir John Soane House in London, in which basically this whole idea of like the superposition of images is repeated in this opening and closing of panels, in which like frame upon frame is like stored within the thickness of the wall. We thought what we really liked about this image is that how the modularity of the woodwork, as you can see, and the paintings, they kind of seem to have a sort of independent relation to each other. So here you can see it a bit in like a bit more advanced models, where also the painting, they could be related, like in this case, with the paneling of these surfaces, and in other moments they could really go over them. These are some snapshots of the exhibition as it opened a few weeks ago. We don't have a picture of the photographer yet, but here you can see a bit how these elements work. For a lot of people in the world of photography, it was a very, I would even say, some people it was a bit of an irrespectful exhibition. And sometimes these photographs were slightly cut in two, or you could see them from an angle, or sometimes even this upper piece of woodwork, they could have a bit of a shadow on the image, etc. But basically we thought it was a very powerful way of creating these different depths and to kind of relate these different parts and these different photographs of same series of pictures. So here, for example, this picture by Ulrich Becker, where all of a sudden they enter this interior space. Or for example, this photo sculpture you see here in a glass vitrine in the middle of the space, where all of a sudden this core element becomes a vitrine. And here you see more or less how it functions as a sort of self-standing structural system. So very close to basically to the Richard Serra sculpture. A final remark, I guess I'm more or less within time, is based on a small article I once read in the architecture log about chess. I like to play chess. I'm not a good chess player, and chess sometimes comes up when talking about architecture. The first time in conversation with Sharon and Mark of Johnston Mark Lee for an Argentinian magazine, we were talking about geometry and about the limited possibilities of geometry, and we kind of compared it to the idea of a chess game. A game which basically each element on the board has very defined rules, a very limited set of possibilities, but in the end, the whole game is very complex, it's very enriching. Architecture for me is like a bit the reverse way of playing chess. You get confronted with a very, very complex situation, a very complex client, a very complex context, with a very complex and layered historical and cultural context. And for me, architecture succeeds if then one way or another we can have all this complex and layered entity, and we can reduce it to simple geometric definitions. Chess game is a very, very fascinating game, because if you see the board, we all recognize immediately the chess game because of the black and white, because of this alternating checkerboard pattern. But that's actually the only thing that's not really necessary to play chess. You can perfectly play chess without this. It has no meaning at all, the black and the white on the chessboard. It's only sort of a visual trick. Now the King's Gambit. The King's Gambit is an openings move in chess, in which the white comes out with the pawn in the middle first, and steps forward 2 jumps, to which black reacts with an opposite move, and he places his black pawn just in front of the white. White will then move and put his pawn just diagonal to the black pawn. It's a situation here where black now has to decide if black takes white, or if he leaves white on the board. It's sort of a decision between material advantage or tactical, strategical advantage on the board. Now, this openings move, which has been described since medieval times in manuscript, it's one of the most very classical openings moves. Basically, in the beginning of the 20th century, chess players at a more professional level, they kind of stopped doing this openings move. Then later, computer analysis also proved that it was actually not such an effective openings move, and it had not a real good turnout in computer analysis. So at the professional level, this openings move has been completely forgotten in King's Gambit. Now, a few years ago, in 2010, Magnusson, a Danish chess player, in the 2010 games against Wang Shu, he again used the King's Gambit to open his game. Of course, all the professional chess players around him were like super excited, and it was like weird to see somebody do something so almost, let's say, clumsy and archaic within a professional competition. He won the game as well, and it was a sort of it was a sort of moment of revelation. A lot of chess players applauded him for this move. In the article that that's why I leave my hand. That Matt Ronan wrote in Log. He kind of ends in a paragraph with this text. I'm going to try to finish with this. In the collective knowledge of players, many of whom defers the computer for analysis, the King's Gambit has become outdated, an anachronism, an amateur's folly. For exactly that reason, in the hands of a generation trained by computation but sufficiently wary of its ability to evaluate numerical factors, the King's Gambit has become all the more relevant again. The opening's complexity, despite its simplicity in the form, the subtlety of its intentions and its potential, the richness of its propositions, its inherent speciality, all in three simple moves, has been rediscovered. This is for me a sort of type of architecture that I would like to make, in a sense that with a sort of very basic openings move, all of a sudden sort of very complex potential and richness could come out. And maybe if I can take your task a bit on me or Roger at a certain moment, maybe it's also something that maybe one way or another can see in the people that will speak tonight after me as well, in which maybe it's very, very obvious and very basic techniques, like maybe the pen in Jimenez's hands, or maybe the old-fashioned interest in anthropology and vernacular of Kovacs, or the skill and this attention to architectural history with Mohamed. Maybe that's something that one way or another can bind us together. Okay, thank you. I'll try to go back.
Can you hear me?
When Andrew was 6 years old, he was hit by a moving car in the middle of the street. He was fine, but the car sustained damage.
That's actually a true story. Thanks for organizing this. I'm happy to present, also with my colleagues. Wonne stole my title. This talk is called 3 Projects. Can you hear me? Should I raise it?
Good.
It's good. This is my work. I thought before I would show the 3 projects, I thought I would explain a little bit about what I do, and I think I would consider it to be making architecture from architecture. If architecture is one way that we organize the world around us, then I would say making architecture from architecture looks at that stuff and proposes to reorganize it for architectural purposes. So this is also my work. Many of these images reorganized in a spectrum of different gradients. So I collect and scan a lot of these images. Sometimes that becomes deployed in various projects. So this was part of my UCLA fellowship where all of these images were scanned onto a wall. Sometimes they're organized not so much by figures. So Wonne showed a lot of references and the figures were really important, but I'm maybe not so interested so much in the figures or styles or say theories, but rather maybe certain qualities. So here, 25 square plans that all have lots of rooms. And sometimes those plans are maybe fragmented and reorganized into a new plan, so old plans becoming new plans. At the same time, I think, I collect also objects in a way that I think have certain architectural qualities, be that kind of mass, form, proportion, color, etc. And so sometimes those objects then become larger objects or even larger objects. So this would be the first project. So while maybe some of these are kind of thought experiments or speculations, this is one version to kind of test it in a real scenario. So this is an unsubmitted entry to the Guggenheim Helsinki competition, and it was basically conceived as a large field, or a highly differentiated field of different compactions of, say, these architectural objects. So in this field, you would have a kind of things maybe highly compacted versus less compacted, that would maybe provide a new type of experience for viewing art. So here you could sort of climb up and look at a painting up close in this kind of mound, or a kind of very, say, conventional or familiar way of viewing art. But to also maybe use some of these objects as a sort of, to recast them in a way where maybe they could become a way to allow art to be viewed. So then, I guess in some sense it's a sort of room, not really maybe, but a very large hall where these sort of different compactions kind of scatter along as one would move along. So I think the 3 projects I'm going to show, the first one being this unsubmitted entry, all in a way kind of relate to each other, either with a play of, say, scale or size. I would say that that's a sort of driving interest in a lot of what I do. So around the same time, I sort of made this model. I also collaborated with Laurel Broughton, who teaches at USC, on this project here, which was partially funded by the LA Forum and Storefront for Art and Architecture. The project was called Gallery Attachment, and it was sited in a parking lot in downtown Los Angeles, specifically Chinatown. And the idea of it was to sort of collect the debris of modern civilization and sort of reorganize it in new ways in this kind of outdoor space. And so in some sense, even though There's not as many objects as I would like, say, as in the Guggenheim proposal. I think you could look at gallery attachment as a kind of small slice, say, of the Guggenheim, sort of realized at a kind of half scale. So here's a kind of elevation. These are, I guess it's a little bit washed out, but these are some of the objects we gathered. This is a toy house. All of them were documented and drawn and exhibited across the street in a gallery where we called them the show As Built, so as we found them. And so this is a plan of that house with some of its new compactions. And so you would get this kind of sort of familiar things, maybe seen in a unfamiliar way. And part of the idea of these attachments, I also went to say the kind of assemblage of them. So there were different types of joints, either from kind of screws, zip ties, tape, foam, etc. And so you would get sort of small things on big things, and this was a kind of a small little detailed shot. And here's another view. And then the kind of overall. So around that time, I was presented with another found object, which is a kind of Airstream trailer. And so I was presented with this from a couple of individuals that wanted to turn it into a mobile swimsuit shop, where they would take it around the beach of California and sell swimsuits. Like every project, there was a low budget. I never heard an architect say, well, this project had a very high budget. So that was kind of vacation stays. But this is how sort of I got it. It had undergone at least one operation from its original status. And actually part of the trailer was cut out, and this sort of wooden hatch replaced it. So this is what I was sort of given. This is what we did to kind of transform it for them into this sort of mobile swimsuit shop that would go up and down the coast. We replaced the sort of wood planks with blue polycarbonate, and the floor was white AstroTurf. White AstroTurf is really wonderful if you want to get something dirty. But the sort of real energy, I would say, went into providing the hooks for the suits that they would sell. So they didn't want a sort of conventional hook. So basically the idea was to go around and look for objects that could function as hooks. And coincidentally enough, I had a number of objects, some of which were in the Guggenheim model. So in that sense, it was very economical. So the hooks range from the top being small to the one at the bottom right there being maybe extra small. And in a way, all of them could not protrude out a certain distance. They all had to be able to function as a hanger, that you could hang a hanger on them. And so they also had to be mounted. And so in some sense, the orientation of a lot of these found objects would change. So there were, say, found animals, or a kind of dinosaur butt that could become a hook, a sort of kitsch puppy that, when rotated, could become a hook. Also kind of miniature architecture. So normally when you would look at these, say, in the real world, looking at the Eiffel Tower in plan, on its side, it could function as a hook, along with, say, a column or the leaning tower. So, and sometimes they were just kind of toys that could maybe work as a hook. Others, I would say, they all had a sort of certain kind of reference to them, either being kind of animals, souvenirs, everyday objects. Some were actually building materials, but some maybe had kind of other, say, historical references. So for example, a train maybe referenced Magritte's train coming out of a wall. And finally it's a bit blown out, but in the changing room was an extra hand, just in case you needed it. This was the other view of the trailer, where we put 2 benches and a sort of colossal lobster. So I guess this is the kind of conclusion, but so I think the 3 projects relate in thinking about size and scale. They all kind of operate by using found things, but I think, you know, the Guggenheim proposal is really just a model. The gallery attachment maybe is a one-to-one installation, but could be conceived of as a sort of half-size slice of the Guggenheim proposal, while the Airstream trailer, I think, itself is a found object in a way, but then sort of occupied and turned into this interior. Thanks.
Jimenez memorized the Encyclopedia of Baseball as a child. He also didn't realize he was left-handed until he was 12.
Hi, thanks. A great honor to present to you guys. I've been here for a year now, and I'm really happy to be here. So I've always normally I have about an hour to do this, but I'm going to try. I've always wondered what happens if you handed Jackson Pollock a Frank Stella canvas. So I'm going to talk about very quickly seven or eight things that I would normally want to talk about. And number one thing that I would normally want to talk about is cartoon. And there are 2 kinds of things that I do with cartoon. There's the cartoon about architecture, and then there's the cartoonish architecture. The first book that I published back in 2012 was titled Citizens of No Place, and I would consider that cartoons about architecture. It's a representation of architecture via cartoon. And sometimes, by extension, I'm not necessarily talking about architecture. I'm talking about thoughts around architecture, or theories that I'm interested within architecture. But then again, nonetheless, they are cartoons about architecture. But more recently, what I've been pondering over is maybe cartoonish architecture that does not necessarily contain a storyline, a maybe linear way of thinking about what storytelling is or means, but rather using a kind of cartoonish sensibility to design architecture, to maybe think about characters, architectural characters, both in elevation, plan, maybe Schwartzy projection, or even the kind of distribution of figure ground that are maybe experiential, possibly experienced as a set of scripts and stages. I normally would also really enjoy talking about rotation. And the 2 kinds of rotation that I often think about are maybe cylindrical rotation versus spherical rotation. And two of the projects that I've done, in fact, the very first project that I ever built was here in LA, in Materials and Applications, titled Balance Stream Module. It is a cylindrical rotation. It's a room that rotates once an hour, flipping the plan into a section into a reflected ceiling plan. The White Elephant, on the other hand, was a project that was pondering the effects of spherical rotation. The differences between a cylindrical rotation and a spherical rotation, for me, is a thought about inside and outside. And maybe by flipping the architecture as a cylinder, we can think about the effects of surfaces on the material and the way that the individual will react to the dimensions of the surfaces on the material. On the other hand, the spherical rotation changes proportion of objects. The proportion of the objects and its relationship to the ground, and therefore the personality of the object changes as it rotates. So as we rotated, people would behave differently. Perhaps on your left, a kind of physical reaction to dimensions, but on your right, a kind of visual reaction to mass. It's a kind of way of thinking about maybe extending other thoughts. For example, thinking about mass or personalities of mass as a tripartite stack of body parts, from the base to the shaft to the capital, or the podium, the plans to the crown. But on the other hand, if we were to be thinking about the inside of the rotation, here recently completed this project with actually a lot of help from here. A room that's completely covered with drawings and scribbles, therefore rendering the plan, equaling its elevations, equaling its reflected ceiling plans, and thus once again completing the rotation of the cylinder. I would also normally enjoy talking about super furniture, which is a project that I've been working on for many years. To your left, the briefcase house was a house that I lived in for almost 5 years, 4 years of changing this. I started living in it in 2009. The briefcase house, once I completed it, I realized that it was an object that was too big to be furniture, but too small to be architecture. And thus beginning this thought process about what super furniture could be or is. But that is a single object super furniture in the briefcase house. In 2014, I had the opportunity to design the Taiwan Pavilion for the Venice Architectural Biennale, where I had the opportunity to attempt the kind of interior urbanism of multiple super furniture. The kind of super furniture that maybe as a single object has a direct inside-outside relationship where you would know when something is a little more private versus something that's a little less private. But when there is a township of it, one's transition and relationship with them becomes individualized. So the choreography of the multiplicities needed to become designed as characters. The two different phases of my life maybe also reflected on the way that I dealt with color. I was going through a pretty, personal time of separation during the time of the briefcase house, and therefore I wanted to paint the world black. Black in the sense that Noli Plant is black, my personal life is black, my private life is black, and so I really enjoyed painting everything black at the time. But later on, I wanted to maybe understand what it means to be optimistic, and I began to maybe deal with more optimistic colors in the project with optimistic parts. But nonetheless, the single object versus the multiple object gave me an opportunity to be thinking about, architecture in terms of what is architecture. I believe architecture is hard on the outside, soft on the inside. I often would also really enjoy talking about furniture and the furniture that we've designed in maybe the more recent past. Thinking about what it means to be flexible and what it means to be specific. So the two sets of furnitures that we've designed at Your Spectacular, the Speech Buster project, which we collaborated with Grayson Cobbs, was commissioned by Storefront for Art and Architecture. And to your right, Furniture Urbanism, which is our entry to the Chicago Architecture Biennial. In both cases, we designed a set of furnitures, not just one. But in both cases, we were thinking about what it means to be exact and specific versus what it means to be flexible. And so, in the case of the Hancock Tower by SOM, it offered me an avenue to be thinking about the article written by Rem Koolhaas, Typical Plan, where flexibility is a fantastic, maybe a tool of capitalism, where flexibility allows furniture to be freely rearranged to create, the kind of urbanism on the interior. Whereas in the Glass House by Philip Johnson, if you so far as rotated one of the tables by a few inches, that is no longer the glass house in the plan, because there's an exact choreography to the specificity of location that is not negotiable. And so for us, we were thinking about the power of furniture and the power of designation of program, the power that furniture commands our actions, the kind of appropriateness or inappropriate misbehavior. When you eat in a place where you're supposed to sleep, when you sleep in a place where you're supposed to cook, these are all maybe terrible things, but then when you juxtapose multiple functions next to each other, I thought that was an interesting way of thinking about the jungle of the interior, or challenging what programming is. Those are the few. Yeah. I would sometimes also enjoy talking about what it means to maybe organize, curate, think about my friends' work. Recently, in 2015, I had the opportunity to work with the Grant Foundation to publish 14 books. 14 books, myself included, with 13 of my great friends and people that I really admire. And we also had the opportunity to organize this into an exhibition. But what does it mean to make an exhibition? This is supposed to be, I guess it's not moving because we're in PDF, which is too bad. I guess it means that you think about certain of your friends because you're thinking about some other people who are like the friends that you think about. And so, for example, when I think about certain of my friends who are just so, let's say, deliberately bad at drawing, or strangely thinking about the anecdotal qualities of distributing anatomies onto a carpet of all over this, or people who have, let's say, full understanding of size and scale issues. These were supposed to be motion images, but because they're not. And more recently, I really have been enjoying my time thinking about domestic architecture, or houses, I guess, and what it means to do normal things. Because if I were to say that cartoonish architecture or geospectacular or whatever it is that we do, we have never really been able to perform what's normal. Let's try to do it. Let's try to do it maybe. And so these are the first two houses that we've developed here in LA. The pool house and the healthy house. I'm sorry the projection has washed out the line work. But of course we were thinking about people like Becker and Becker and Shea in terms of how to engage in normal. And I believe that normal is created by redundancy. If there's a lot of it, it's probably true. And incidentally, we found that there is a lot of pool. And not only a lot of pool, but a lot of different kinds of pool culture. Even the kind of pool culture that relies on dried pools. And for those of us who are interested in doubly curved surfaces, we in fact don't need to look any further. They're in everybody's backyards. In the section, they're super interesting as surfaces, but in plan as well, their shapes are actually rather attractive as internal organs. We could even think about the pool as a place that transports us to the romantic space, where wonderful things happen not only inside the pool, but around the pool. So the pool house was that opportunity for us. We were thinking about being under the pool, taking the pool as a conversation pit, or even taking refuge in the pool so that we can have fire and sleep. But perhaps more importantly, we were thinking about what it means to be healthy. And so, in fact, in LA, what we've been maybe realizing about being healthy is that the appearance of being healthy is sometimes even more important than actually being healthy. And so it led me to be thinking about friends such as Ante Liu, who painted an architecture green, or the vertical elevation as landscape is kind of a composition opportunity. Perhaps Mike Kelly is a good person to think about. Or perhaps green as elevation is a new beginning, the portal to an alternate reality of sorts. So, in the words of one of my favorite bands, the Antwoord, pretty on the skin, ugly from within. And maybe normal on the outside, and not necessarily normal on the inside, is something that we're currently thinking about. Finally, I would have really enjoyed maybe thinking about comics for similitude and realisms. Because I've been yelled at by my mother for many, many years about doing comics and architecture, since there is no direct correlation to her mind. But I have always thought that there is a direct correlation as the transportations of realities between means of representations. And maybe this kind of relationship with the representation goes super way back, really, really way back in terms of cave paintings. Even if we attempt verisimilitude, we lose information. But to the information we lose, what we gain is maybe the kind of feeling, a kind of new feeling that certain realisms would also allow us, but other realisms in terms of portraits that Chuck Close would paint, or the kinds of portraits of architecture from Madeline Grissendorf creates new personalities or different kinds of readings. Indeed, our relationship with comic books, in fact, I view these kinds of images, compositions as comic books, or text image composition, has always existed with our history, and not only that, it existed within our history to architecture, because a comic book like this will go onto the wall, the interior elevation. It's actually a kind of interior elevation that certain of more recent individuals would treat the comic book as an environment, actually. At the very end, thinking about comics and verisimilitude and realisms, for me, I want to end by thinking about the three kinds of comics that I come to know and love. The Franco-Belgic tradition of comics, where the bande dessinée, a kind of sequencing of similar images that are framed by time. The Japanese manga, where a kind of, let's say, a professionalization of imperfection, a way of thinking about the embracement of sadness, or the American comics, the kind of heroic and melancholic. And indeed, a kind of bande dessinée, the framing of a cinematic filmic strip, of acceptance to imperfection, and also finally the kind of heroic and melancholic. That's it. I want to end this image. I wasn't back when we looked at this picture. There's Andrew.
Mohamed's story was actually more of a boast, which is the first time I've actually heard him boast, that he really can bend it like Beckham.
Thanks, Roger. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? Greg saw the slide count and said, he's done. All right, okay. All right, I'll take it slowly. Do we just hit the forward button?
Just hit the arrow.
Okay. So I'm going to be as quick as I can. I have some issues. I'm working through a few things. One of them is I'm a hopeless editor, so there's way too many slides. So I'm going to try to pick up the pace here and there, so bear with me. I think I have daddy issues, or at least an imaginary daddy issue. I actually, Roger, I was going to tell you that my thing was, my mom used to say, you know you're Wednesday's child. And Wednesday's child is a child of woe. So, I have mommy issues. Jimenez, you ended on the heroic and the melancholic. I think that's going to come on. And I think there's going to be a bunch of stuff that ties us together. As Roger mentioned, I went to school at IIT for a year. It was a rite of passage for third-year undergrads in my school, or at least two lucky or unlucky souls who were picked to go and do that, because my school, the northernmost school of architecture in the UK, was for some strange reason an unreconstructed bastion of Musean architecture. I didn't know a grid from my elbow for the first year. Desk crits were really quick. You were asked, is it 3.6 meters or 7.2? If you didn't have an answer, they picked it for you. So anyway, in my second year, I got really good, and I could and I could make plans. And so I got to Chicago. I got to Chicago at a strange time. I was right there. He was long gone. And that was the year that they changed the entire curriculum. So talk about bad timing. Anyway, I think things worked out for the best for me, I think. Across town, Stanley Tigerman ran a really interesting school. That's the first time that I ever heard Bob Sonnell speak. Actually, Bob did a double act with this guy called David Farrell. Yeah, bleached, spiky hair. And Stanley had famously made this image, and sinking crown into Lake Michigan. And I always thought that was cheeky. And being a bit of a kind of football supporter, I was, even though I was an IT guy, what the hell? But I got it over time. Sometimes I want to sink these. And sometimes I want to bend in my breath. So I'm just going to that's a quick gloss over daddy issues. Niece has a very long half-life for me. It's still corrosive. And that's going to come up in some of the projects. I'm going to dart around, and this first few minutes is just a quick prelude to say that just fast forward quite a few years, I got to do a building, a very simple building that was the closest that I could get to redeem my education and everything that I'd been taught. But it was a dirty piece. And it's a building 80 miles east of here on the 10. It's an 11,000 square foot campus restaurant. And it was, after a few years of practicing in this country, kind of a rare event where literally what you saw is what you got. There was a concrete box, there was a steel and glass eating board. I detailed every last inch of this, and it was also kind of a completion, albeit unrewarded, of the British rite of passage, where to complete your education, to get registered, that would be your RIBA Part 3. So I did this quietly in the woods. It paid me enough to rent space, and I had to get the closest that I could get to getting a Miesian education out of my system. I think this project, and I knew it at the time, had maybe way more to do with architects like the Smithsons, proportionally more to do with architects like Neutra. But I did it, and it took 2 years. I drew every last inch of this, saw it through, coordinated the shop drawings. I just had to get it out of my system. So just a few images. So like I said, I think I probably had more in common with the Smithsons. I came to the Smithsons to understand the Smithsons by being a disobedient boy and writing my undergraduate dissertation on Venturi and Scott Brown, and learning a lot about Denise Scott Brown and her, I think through Denise Scott Brown's anecdotes, it opened my eyes up to the Smithsons. I have more of an affinity with them. They did Dirty Niece, they profaned the sacred. Georgina, you're going to be seeing this in a few weeks. I'm really interested also in their, I think actually they were bad architects, but they were so bad they're good. Their proportions were weird, they were off, and yes, they were part of the independent group, and yada yada. So I'm interested in them. Anyway, I was educated also in a time where that Miesian confidence had been, I mean, there is no such thing as society. That was Margaret Thatcher's refrain, following in the kind of ideological footsteps of Mentor Ronald Reagan. So everything that I was educated to do had no society waiting for it to happen. All of the public's works, the public sphere, laid asunder. Anyway. But I was looking at architects who were maybe using the leftovers, the emptiness as a playground, and maybe constructing new opportunities subjects and new kinds of things to emerge in, let's say, what was left over when stock markets crashed and so on. Little known B-side architects who were and for a young architect like me, I think a more quote-unquote real alternative to Norman Foster, Richard Rogers, and so on. People you probably never heard of. This is an Austrian fellow who still practices in London and teaches in North London, Florian Weigel. This is a project by him called the Half Moon Theatre. Clearly there are affinities with people like Gordon and Clark, subtraction, dealing with the emptiness. And then a very important architect for me, also back then, B-side, I remember inviting him up to talk, and one of my friends said, he's dining out on not a lot. And so that was Tony Breton, and this is his first project, which is the Listen Gallery in London. And I was interested in this kind of work that was awkward, obviously had affinities with people like the Smithsons, but big openings over small openings and made the world just shift 1 degree. For me, this was the kind of thing that I was looking at, that I was interested in. And particularly, I think the relationship of the street to the sort of the decrepit and poverty-stricken institutions post-Margaret Thatcher, a sense of empathy between that kind of urban landscape and these tender, I think, sweet and Losian projects of people like Tony Breton, so you see that here. Back to Nice for a second. We were never allowed to talk about Berlin-Nice. Berlin-Nice never made sense. We went to Chicago for a reason, because Chicago-Nice was inland steel SOM Nice, and again was representative of the kind of confidence can-do spirit of the American century. Looking back at Nice and the campus that I'd studied on, and thinking about Berlin, I guess I want to get to my Berlin. Anyway, he hung out with the Kurt Spinners. Andrew, I think you're the Kurt Spinners of Lockfield. And he, apparently Nice's pencil is in the Märzbau, among many other things. And so I'm really interested in Berlin-Nice, in the words of Ventura and Scott Brown, ugly and ordinary Nice. Nice who's restless, Nice who's struggling, Nice who is working on, I'd say, upsetting a minor just by a degree. So for me, the fraternal twins in Krefeld are still amazing. Wonne, I think your project, the 3-cube project, it's uncanny that there are moments in this that just remind me of that. And I'm interested in staggered enfilade Nice, splitting the axis Nice, naughty Nice, and just the bad boy who split spaces and just did really kind of weird things. I'm interested in mise en scène Nice, Tugendhat, there will be echoes of that. I'm interested in this Nice, Nice trying on different characters. I'm interested in charcoal Nice. I'm also interested in Iberian wall splitters like Alejandro de la Sota and in Alvaro Siza, who can cut that line in space and put positive and negative in this incredibly tense relationship. So these are the things that are of interest. Theater is an interest. Inigo Jones, who brought Palladio to the English-speaking world, was a mask, Elizabethan court mask designer. He designed scenography. That's how Palladio landed in the English-speaking world. I'm interested in modernist theater, in Artaud's theater of cruelty as one way of thinking about architecture, in Brecht's epic theater as one way of thinking about architecture, and probably most of all in Beckett's a theater of the absurd as another way of thinking about architecture. Nice made stage sets as the Color Muller full scale is a haunting image. These postcards, I think for me, the projects are actually just postcards at the end of the day. My own, the ones that I worked with others. These knew how to make a space for a crowd, or an approximate space for a crowd in one image. Of course, Hayek was an amazing mask maker, but I think really, as much as I love that work, it's too chattery for me. So I prefer the silence. And of course, Bernard Twombly is a master of the notion of the event and the filmic, and I can, that's someone that one looks at. But again, I retreat to more neatness and really less of an interest in the actors and more of an interest in the stage upon which or against which something TBD, right? Nothing to do with me. I'm interested in this. This, for me, is one of the most amazing buildings in recent times, and that kind of bleached, blank agony and that restlessness, for me, echoes with Mises' restlessness in Berlin, and trying his hand between the wars, wondering who he was, identity issues, and so my Berlin in a very small way is to redeem some of that, at least in my work for me. Sadness, bonjour tristesse, hello sadness. There is a pervasive sense of melancholy. Wednesday's Child, I manage it. Aldo Rossi managed it, and it's something that is incredible for me to think that kind of a revisit of Nice, a completely imaginary one, as an alternative, not in an ideological way, but another way of thinking through some of the orthodoxies or the assumed kind of conventional default settings of modernism, in the way that Rossi reconstituted a sort of classical city. Just to sort of paraphrase him, for me, the future city is the one in which the fragments of something broken in its heart are rearranged. So I think I'm working on a rearrangement and disremembering some of Mises' tricks and cues. I'm interested in punctuation. I think architecture, rather than investing in a kind of in meaning per se, I think architecture actually can operate like punctuation. That's far more interesting to me. And this is for you, Jason. I think punctuation can be quite a wonderful thing. And interrupt flows, interrupt meanings. And I would rather make something like this than that. That's far more important. So, very quickly, you may recognize this empty hull. It's the linear asylum of willing alchemists, just across town. Before it was Syar, it was a ruin, it was a playground. It exists under one kind of open frame. One of the things that I remember the most as a student is hearing Peter Smithson talk near the end of his life, a year actually after Alison Smithson died to the day, and making I think an obvious remark, but so obviously miss it, that the sky is a ceiling, and it's something that you actually really appreciate living in cities like London and cities like Bonn. So the sky is a ceiling that's very important. Sometimes we literally want to bend it, and sometimes we want to split it, and sometimes we just want to make a confusing place. This is a project for This is an image by Gerhard Richter speaking at the crowd. And this is a funeral. This is a space. There was a competition, a memorial for the Yitzhak Rabin, an assassinated man, an assassinated hawk turned dove, killed by one of his own. And so we made, many years ago, images of a space where skies would be suspended within the sky. It was a nod to a Palestinian poet, Mahmoud Darwish, after the last sky. That's been updated recently also with Amanda Shin. This is the Tel Aviv municipality in which Yitzhak Rabin was at a rally. He was assassinated under a platform in the parking in the Port Cochet. And so this project claims a kind of a colonnade perimeter, a pretty hyperactive thing. It kind of blocks, interrupts that point perimeter with a thickened wall, sinks the ground beneath it. These are blind tubes, and then reverses a kind of a panopticon figure under a plateau. This is what the edge is like. It's supposed to be disorienting. You're supposed to sense the split between above, below, and so on. And you're supposed to feel what it's like to be assassinated. I'm going to zip through this. A similar geopolitical thing, projection. A show that we did that commenced with a very long email exchange between 4 Israeli and 4 Palestinian filmmakers who couldn't settle on the title of the show. That was the biggest decision. But we got there, it was one ground, and it consisted of objects and rooms and surfaces for projection in Stanley Sadowitz's Museum of Photography at UC Riverside. And so there were some amazing artists, world-class artists, Wonne Ickx, Emily Jaser, Ori Gersht, so these were like huge 12-foot-high muslin, stretched muslin over framework. That's Wonne Ickx. She was amazing. And then my favorite image is Michal Wagner and this line from her film, "You're filling the frame, is that how it should be?" I think that's a good question for us. How am I doing for time? Okay? No? Done? All right. Shall I stop? Okay, so look, there's so much more. I'm just going to do this. This is a late session. Hour classes. Can I just show our house? All right, so there's a house in Mar Vista. And I worked with Katie Chu and Sam Hoke in the spring. They managed to carve the 25th hour out of every 24-hour day to get this into plan check. And then Sam Hoke worked with me over the summer, and it's on site. It's an L-shaped building. This is the plan. This is what it looks like. That's what happened the day after Labor Day. This has happened recently. Split. Thanks.
hours left. Now's actually a good time. Nice to meet you.
Okay, this is the part that truly terrified me. There was a lot of aggregating going on. That was a general impression. Something, maybe I'll just make a very quick reflection, and then maybe we can have a little bit of a response and conversation that would follow. I was led to think a little bit about the kind of 19th century grand tour that architects would take after they had finished their schooling in architecture. They would usually come from a kind of well-heeled family in the United States, sometimes in Europe. Let's say in the United States, and then they would earn the right to be able to travel the world, which at that time was Europe. See all the great monuments, and then come back and incorporate them into what at that time was the Beaux-Arts movement, in which you could see various things that had been recorded in their sketchbooks prior to photography, somehow synthesized in their work. And it seemed to me that there was a kind of a curious, let's say, I don't want to say quite a reversal, but conversion of that phenomenon, which has happened perhaps more organically in the cases of many of you, in which it's not that you had come from a stable home base and had taken a tour, but actually over the course of your adult lives, both before being educated as architects and after, have traveled many of those roads, and for a variety of reasons, seem to be obsessed with some interest in collection. And I wonder to what extent it is that when one leads one's life, how easy it is necessarily to separate it from architecture, and how much the experience that one has as being, product of a lot of different places affects a kind of inability to necessarily commit to a particular aesthetic preference, rather than maybe necessarily I'm not sure aesthetic preference is necessarily fair. Let's say that somehow the process of working on things, or of putting things together, of being more interested in the act of adaptation and syndication or aggregation, starts becoming of greater interest than necessarily the commitment to a very specific thing itself. And rather, let's say I'm just sort of thinking about, I don't know if I'll be able to go through all of you, but in Andrew, in your case, there seems to be a decided interest in making things new again somehow, and finding things, that had already had one life, and giving them a second life, and in some cases a third life. In Jimenez's case, I think maybe in the case of the rotational explorations that you had done, simply in looking at the way in which things can be repositioned. And I use that in different regards, meaning physically or spatially repositioned versus programmatically, or their relationship by inference perceptually repositioned and programmatically repositioned, also has somehow to do with this idea of how one adapts to an experience of change autobiographically. Maybe even interestingly, in the case of your interest in the chess game and the tactics about which to do. I was kind of actually more interested in the idea of having to make the choice, between making one decision and making another, and what those things meant, than I was necessarily in what your point was about the old, digital versus non-digital. Mohamed, the same thing, kind of seemingly just constantly being overwrought with the sources of you know, of the many things that you've been obsessed with. How you might talk a little bit more about how that manner of the putting together of things, the assembling of things, or the aggregating of things, as opposed to necessarily object making in a traditional sense, as we've been used to discussing over the past 10 years or so that I've been here. What thoughts you might have, maybe either relative to one another or kind of in your own experience of practice, and how how you see that in terms of what it portends for the future as you move toward other ways of thinking. Well, I'll start with, ask you, Jimenez, you just finished a house, a design for a particular house which struck me because it actually was something that couldn't necessarily, you actually moved out of a certain method of, perhaps by necessity, of having to put things kind of, where there was a degree of fixity that I think that required a degree of commitment, I suppose, to the idea that the thing could not be necessarily rotated in over time or reassembled as easily as you might have, and how, when you move through that threshold, you begin to figure out how you deal with the paradox of your interests in collecting and recollecting and adaptation, and actually then start to look at how that starts to settle into the kind of resistance that architecture typically offers in terms of kind of the nature of its own permanence.
Wait, it's on. Oh, it's definitely on. Yeah. So, are you referring to the pool house? Yeah. So we actually, in summer, we actually designed 5 houses. So to maybe answer your question about the fixity or the kind of engagement or full commitment to something, we also couldn't. We had to do 5 in that setting. And so, in a way, I think, but then again, I think it's also really important for us to start doing something beyond what I call the Mickey Mouse Club. I've been in Mickey Mouse Club for so long, for many, many years. I think for 7 or 8 years I've been in Mickey Mouse Club. I think I've made all-star games in Mickey Mouse Club. I want to practice. I want to make buildings. I want to practice. And so, without engaging actual conventions of architecture, that day will never come. And therefore, I think by moving out here, one of the first things that I want to do with your spectacular is just do it, make some really engage architecture.
But do you think it's going to have it will affect the way you work on your architecture? For example, Andrew, you know it. I'm always super pissed that you never gave in your competition for the Gold Package.
Yeah.
Because I think it becomes very valuable, I think, for me, if it's there as a competition entry, even without a certain irony, because I think maybe it's one of the best competition entries that
Well, I'm happy you think that.
were there.
No, I agree. I totally agree, and I told you that too.
No, but there's a problem
Yeah.
with a certain irony.
Well, I just had had other. I was at Jimenez's wedding. It was just.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, okay.
So,
That
actually
explains
was
it.
at Jimenez's
No,
wedding.
he was my best
So,
man, actually.
Yeah.
Twice. You were almost
Twice.
twice.
With the same wife.
I don't know if in listening to you, I intend to say this in a way that's more observational than critical, sincerely, but a kind of idea of a lack of commitment, and the idea of looking at the lack of commitment as a productive force, the 5 houses. Do you do the 5 houses or the 60 houses as Brun would do it in order to pick the one? You know, is it a means of discursive, you know, is it a discursive process? Or is it more like Duchamp, where, you know, depending upon which way the door is open or closed, like with the chess game, it's used in an instrumental way, where it can actually be built, that sense of a lack of commitment can be built into an architecture in which choice is, where the forcing of choice ends up actually being instantiated in the project itself. It seems to me that there's an interest in an ambivalence about commitment that is permeating the work in different ways in a serious and conscious manner. And I'm trying to interrogate that a little further.
I think quantity is a big commitment, actually. So I think like there's definitely a kind of thread of quantity in a lot of the stuff I do. And you also kind of brought up collecting. Like I see collecting in a way, most people do it as a kind of end, that it sort of never becomes mobilized, never can sort of be used in a productive way. And I think now, in some sense, I actually think collecting is sort of dead. So for me, collecting is only valuable. It might look like a collection, but it's only valuable insofar as that it can be used for other purposes. So I think the commitment thing, there's sort of actually, maybe it comes across as lack of commitment, but I think that there's actually sort of intense commitment, partly, and I think there's a sort of, the element of, say, quantity, I think, maybe reveals that.
Maybe I could ask you to just go a little further in terms of saying, when you were saying you were trying to use collecting as a means to an end,
Yeah.
to parlay it into something, I guess that's what I think folks here might be curious in.
Well, I would separate it out between, say, collecting and selecting. So I think that there's a difference between the two, and I'm probably more interested in selecting things or picking things, and probably that, again, is how that might be used in, say, future purposes. And that's not, so I think a lot of the time, that's why maybe it's more of an interest in certain qualities rather than figures, or even though I'm obviously interested in figures and theories and styles and all that stuff, but I think in a sense I'm more looking for the sort of innate qualities of stuff rather than kind of the authors. But I think there's a sort of like kind of holding pattern to some of them in a way.
I understand that there's clearly an interest in curation. I guess my question is, in a day, in a moment in time in which so much is available at all times to all people, whether the enterprise that you describe is closer to that of, say, Sohn, where it's a very specific sensibility of things that he likes and therefore collects, or whether or not you're on the verge of confronting a more public version of that, that is actually just around the corner from, say, participatory government, in which people want to actually be able to choose things.
Sure.
And that there's a process whereby you say, sure, you can choose, but I'm going to be the one to provide you with the options somehow. Or there's I thought perhaps there was some way of swerving that practice towards something that became less private and more public or open to debate. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, I'm just trying to provoke you a bit and see where that goes. After all, there must have been some significance to the fact that you were doing these things in parking lots, that you weren't doing it in your room, in your house.
I mean, there are other ones that I do in my room. So, but maybe another way to put it is sort of not to bring people to architecture, but to sort of bring architecture to the people. And I think maybe there's a kind of interest in a sort of, while I'm very much interested in the discipline of architecture, I think a lot of people sort of don't get it. And I think that for me, at least, it's important and interesting that the discipline or architecture can be made accessible without sort of watering it down too much.
How is that through the conceit of the garage sale? Of providing a format which is more familiar and thereby you're actually feeding them a little, a pill in the peanut butter, like they're actually seeing, in fact, that there are things that seem very, that are embedded within very everyday things that actually have a more serious intent? Or?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a consequence of it, that there's a kind of recognizability to certain things, or a kind of familiarity with certain things that maybe a broader audience might be able to grasp, but then to kind of twist that a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I think maybe this idea of making something legible or making something familiar or something where you feel related to. I think that's maybe something that's like in a comic strip there. That's maybe something that I look for in my architecture as well. And I don't know. I mean, of course, when you get invited to sort of group show in UCLA with all young colleagues, friends of yours, then of course you think a bit what are these things that this new generation, what binds these new generations together. And from my point of view, and I'm sorry, it's a bit my mistake. I think that you read it as a sort of digital or non-digital dichotomy, but it's more sort of a way of to kind of generate sort of architecture which is maybe much more legible and much more directly related to some things we know in our daily life, from objects from trash to certain styles or to comic books or.
Any question? Yeah, in the back.
I was really delighted to see how politics kind of permeated all of the presentations. I was really interested also how kind of a rhetoric or maybe like a lexicon of late capitalism played into it too. I think we talked about mobility and modality, and then also a little bit of this kind of populist appeal later on about kind of accessibility. And so I was just interested how you all individually interpret those really big questions in your own work.
I think every line you draw on a piece of paper, it's a political act, of course, but I must honestly say that it's not a sort of a strong social or political stance at the moment you design an addition to a house in Silver Lake or you do an exhibition design. I think when you talk about public projects, I think much more crucial issues come to light, I think. In my case, at least.
Yeah, last time I was at Mike Lawson's house, it was really embarrassing. I can't talk about politics.
Michael confirms.
I think that.
I think that's a great question. For me, with the urban ruins and the idea of punctuation, I think I'm working on obstacles, like just the debris of discipline, a disciplinary society sticking in the craw of a control society that they're deliberately devoid of human beings, with the idea that after someone like the Gamben, that's the space for a coming community that is ungovernable, that will determine itself. That's what I'm interested in. So those public projects are for publics to come. They're unpopulated. It's my own little private diary.
And I think, for example, as a sort of reference, for example, like There was a certain moment of discussion about about the Brazilian modernists, and it was Artigas and Niemeyer had a conversation. And at a certain moment, Artigas, Villanova Artigas says, of course there's a lot of tensions present in Brazilian society. And Oscar Niemeyer, one way or another, he managed to convert these into sort of powerful, evocative buildings in which it becomes a sort of it becomes a harmony. And what he tried to do in his building, I said, what I try to do in my architecture is to kind of show and make visible these underlying tensions. And I think that's certainly something that I'm interested in, especially the house we're doing now in LA. Instead of what maybe the client would have wanted, to maybe convert her 1920s cottage into a sort of modern hybrid nowadays, I prefer to kind of show the tension present between these different moments of time and different ways of relating to the land, to the territory, to the surroundings, to the views, etc.
I just have a question, because this is somewhat framed within the context of showcasing and presenting on a platform for an emerging generation within the faculty or within collective culture. What I find kind of fascinating, other than maybe Mohamed's connection with past references and mentors, is an interesting kind of lack of provocation or resistance for the generation before you, which has always been kind of like a mainstay of every generational tradition in the 20th century, that you're always trying to beat your father or beat your grandfather, or there's always a mode of like subversive or resistance towards a generational tradition. And so what I find kind of fascinating is, except for Mohammed, the other three were somewhat mutually located within kind of the universal set of architectural conditions. You know, you could talk about collections, or you could talk about other, I would say maybe non-generational conditions or issues that are always present within architecture. I mean, is it fair to say that there is no either political or other agenda that is generationally related or that feeds into your own kind of personal exploration and psyche? Just for like, when I was listening to Mohammed, I mean, that's probably because of my age. That's probably the one topic that relate to, you know, like every figure you're bringing up. And what I found fascinating between the other three were this kind of fascinating, very personal agendas of what interested you rather than a larger political or cultural context of art. Maybe that's just an observation.
Wasn't the bandwidth for 65 and 75 for everybody? Maybe 80s with Andrew and Dennis? I mean, it seems
1919.
No, I mean from Nice to Hayden, which is a very, it is interesting that it's so many generations back, but it seems very coherent among the four of you. That time period seems to be a really important time period. The end of heroic modernism and the beginning of something else.
Yeah.
But
And I
it
think-
stops at the beginning of something else, whether it's Solowit or Hayden.
And I
That's all in a very unique period.
It was also a time frame. It was also a time frame, I think, which is very similar to the one from now, that people didn't know, were doubting. There were like currents in architecture. We were really, really very much forward-looking and really doing very innovative experiments, both on all kind of levels. But there was also a whole generation that was very critical about the experiments and innovation that just happened a decade before. And these two coexisted. And I'm feeling the same thing happens now. It's a very interesting moment in time. It's both in the architecture and in the art world. I see it as well. My wife is a contemporary art curator. But also, a lot of people are busy with politic-based art, for example, and other people are really, really like very critical towards it. And I really see similarities between like the exciting moment of high modernism and all the critique afterwards, and now the exciting moment of all this of digital technology, but also of the globalization and this world boom and star architects and this big party that was going on, and now all of these voices that I think let's not throw away all the things we learned and all the things we gained, but they're like coexisting at the same moment. I think that's.
No, I mean, for me, the period between the wars, or between the First World War and the Second World War, there's looking back at that work now in Berlin, let's say, Nice, or others, it was a revelation for me as a young architect to see that as a part of postmodern phase. To look at people like Bertolt Gulbenkian in London as very quickly going through the anxieties that would beset people in the 60s. I see a fragility and a weirdness and a restlessness in Nice between 1919, 18, and the shutting down of the Bauhaus that is sweet and tender and interesting and bruised and full of use. I mean, I would say that the Tripolo camp, Friedrichstrasse is the first Tripolo building.
What was the Tripolo again? I don't know. Sorry.
So meaning there's a fog and an interest in that's the seeding, the bandwidth, the grandness.
Can I just add to that really quick? I think that these two questions raise a pretty important point in terms of all of the work. Is that in the East, right, there seems to be a lack of ethical assassination complex in three of the four organizations. And Greg's right that with everyone looking back at that fairly tight period of time, no one's looking back at killing, in the sense that if anything, it was a kind of a sort of celebratory reanimation of certain themes that had gone dormant for the 20th century. So not only are you not trying to kill the figures or tactics of that period, you're not trying to kill the immediate ancestors, whoever they may be, but there's a kind of this reanimation of the force of the level in some sense. And so all of that, the whole time I was thinking that the word that was missing, like I said, is irony. That there seems to be a kind of deploying of the technique of irony, again, in sort of three of the four presentations. But the irony was not deployed in the way that it was typically used in that period of prayer, to sort of destabilize or undermine an existing condition. But rather the irony was used in a kind of things fun, whether it be King's Gambit or any of the various uses of irony. There's a very strange position that's going on. It seems hard to come to terms with in a more traditional mode of like killing what came before. I wonder if it has something to do with Mickey Mouse Club.
So I think if you really want to be an assassin, talk about it.
If you really want to be an assassin, you don't talk about it.
Why are you talking about it?
I guess, no, you're right. You know, one project that I didn't show, Eugene Summers was the guy who changed the curriculum the year that I arrived. It was Mises' right-hand guy for 16 years in Mises' office. And his first job out of the office was he was the head guy at Smith Murphy, big Chicago corporate firm, and they did McCormick place. So there was an ideas competition for the place. And it was full of what should we do with it? What can we put in it? And I think for that period for me, what was missing for me personally was sitting ship, was mourning for it, letting it go, letting it die with dignity. And so we did a Costanza, lifting our hands, take the roof off the thing, take the clothes off, let the water take it, and over time corrode it and send it back. It was a deadlocked jury. project architect on that. And Jory Hamilton broke the deadlock and said, let it go. And I think for me, I'm learning to let it go. And I think that's the agonism for me. Is personally, I do want to kill it, but we think and find it.
Right before I came here, right before I came to UCLA, there was a time when I had to say goodbye to a lot of people in Chicago that I really care about, including Stanley. So I had lunch with Stanley. We chatted for a few hours. And he again brought up the baton, which he has brought up a few times with me and the other people. Aaron, perhaps Stanley has talked about the baton with you as well. Baton, he likes to talk about the baton and that, I guess in a race, you would pass it on to the next person and that person would run with that baton. Or it's a weapon. So that when you pass it on to that person, hopefully that person takes it and stabs you. So Stanley once again was talking about that. Why don't you guys want to stab us? And I think for me, first of all, I have a lot of respect for Stanley. I have no interest in hurting him or in any way. Second of all, maybe I'm accidentally engaging in these acts that you speak of, and I'm somewhat aware of things that I do, but I think these things happen naturally. I can't really preemptively target certain people. I just do what I do.
I want to be clear, I'm not saying that it's necessary as a kind of way of positioning myself, but in the absence of that kind of very familiar with it leaves open the possibility of reading what you do in this kind of presentation, which I don't think is what you do. And it leaves me wanting more specific position from like how can the Mickey Mouse Club you describe not be seen as purgatory or some kind of waiting lounge, but rather as a sort of new mode of building a generation. Which maybe doesn't know.
I think it has.
Yeah, but the question I thought is how can we define that a little bit more? No? How can we make the stance clear? I was thinking about this moment in history when the beginning of postmodernism, and I think
When was that?
I don't know, like, let's say like the end of the 60s or something. We're now in a very strange moment that we can be simultaneously seduced by modernism and postmodernism. I think I see it with my students as well. They bring up very different references to the table, and they come from a whole span of years. And for example, instead of killing the generation before, I think people at the people that we now see as the true postmodern, the representation of postmodernism, I thought they were not so interesting architects or characters or thinkers. I'm rather interested in these people that kind of stayed faithful one way or another to a sort of postmodern, sort of modern drive, but then kind of try to incorporate, sometimes in a bit of a clumsy way, but try to incorporate the criticism of modernism. And so they didn't try to kill the generation before, like a James Sterling, for example. No, we didn't try to. It's like this third generation of modernists that then try to incorporate these critiques into their practice.
Dana, I'm going to do the last
I'm
word.
not sure this should be last, but I think it's a little bit too much of a burden to say for these four guys to represent the new generation. That doesn't seem quite right. It's really interesting to see the four presentations develop and how they pulled as a unit. Is something we're all hoping to find. I think that's false. But if there's something that seems like it comes out of this conversation, an alternative to this conversation might be to think about it as redisciplining. That instead of actually thinking, Denver and I talked about, this is postmodernism, But I think that that would be to somehow imagine that it's still the same race and that we're actually working with Stanley to take it along some path that we believe in. And the thing that seems true to me is that there's a way in which we've been spending so much time in the last 15 years, maybe since post-modern, trying to create the discipline. It would be appropriate now to, undo some of that and not expect that we have to do it fathers or generate some new content.
Yeah, I tend to, I'm left with some sense, and I'm just expressing my own opinion at this point, that the question is no longer one of belief or a change of belief, but that actually there's simply in stories. In other words, the way that things are related seems to be through personal histories or stories of one's own making. It's a little bit like the difference in the news between people who are actually genuine critics and pundits where the truth is incidental any longer. If you've got a better story to tell somehow, and that the story, your own story, each of our own stories, or in the ways that you construct them, are not trying to pretend to be forms of belief. They're just what they are. So anyway, thank you all for